Hey everybody, today we're going to be reviewing another book. It is Range by David Epstein. Now, if you know what I've been doing, I've been creating a podcast called Beat the Often Path, where I showcase unusual success stories to help everybody think outside of the box in life and in business. And this book was recommended to me by somebody, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's got a lot of the same ideas as my original thesis. In fact, it's a book that I could have written if I were a lot smarter than I actually am. You'll notice that I've got tons and tons of little markers here on the side. I was highlighting almost everything in this book. I was underlining almost everything in this book, and at a certain point you gotta realize maybe the whole book is just that good. So let's get into it in this book review. So let's jump right into it, shall we? Okay, so the general thesis here is that we see a lot of people like Tiger Woods in life. Tiger Woods was raised by Earl Woods. It's a famous story. He was a little boy, and his father even taught other people how to raise children with his theory of you need to get them doing one focused thing. You need to make sure that they're doing golf every day, that you build them up to be a champion. And that thought has had a lot of traction in competitive fields like sports and other fields like chess, and for many years people believed that that was the way to breed a champion. But he dissects that for every Tiger Woods, there's also a Roger Federer, a tennis champ who wasn't raised only playing tennis, who had tried a whole bunch of different sports, showed no particular interest in tennis until later in life, and then he heavily specialized, and of course they both became roughly equal world champions in their contribution to their sport when they got older. So you don't have to take one path. That's the hypothesis at the outset of this book, which is very similar to my hypothesis in Beat the Often Path. So a lot of parallels there. Now, he frames what is called a kind learning environment and what's called a wicked learning environment. And he would argue that narrow specialization tends to benefit people in kind learning environments where the rules are clear, there's structure, the rules never change, and it's very obvious what the goal is. Kind learning environments would be something like chess or something like golf, where the rules never change. The players change, other things change, but the game is the game. And then narrow focus or hyperspecialization is the key. However, many things in life, like success or like making money or contributing to the economy, aren't at all a kind environment. They're a wicked environment, and that you don't even know what the rules of the game are. You're born and you're trying to figure out the rules of the game, hopefully before you die. Many people never do. So narrowly focusing on one thing may not be the best path towards winning that game. So many excellent chapters in here, so many excellent quotes. I'm going to read you one of my favorites here. So, first of all, people who have succeeded, they focused on, here's who I am at the moment, here are my motivations, here's what I've found I like to do, here's what I'd like to learn, and here are the opportunities. Which of these is the best match right now? Short-term planning, they'll practice it, not long-term planning, meaning that a lot of people found success by doing the next right thing, by finding the next most obvious path and just following that. And he details the case of several people, one woman who went to be the head of Girl Scouts who did all kinds of different things before ultimately ending up as the head of that organization in a very meandering path. And he cites somebody named Ogas, I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. Ogas uses the shorthand standardization covenant for the cultural notion that it's rational to trade a winding path of self-exploration for a rigid goal with a head start because it ensures stability. Which is very fascinating because in my podcast, I call that the often path, the typical path, the Tiger Woods path, the straight path, the obvious path towards success. But he is suggesting that there are many examples of people, Charles Darwin included, Vincent van Gogh included, that did not follow a path anything like that. So there are so many exceptional quotes here. And this one I also really love. The psychologist in a study that he's talking about, they highlighted the variety of paths to excellence, but the most common was a sampling period, often lightly structured with some lessons and a breadth of instruments and activities, followed only later by a narrowing of focus, increased structure, and explosion of practice volume. So essentially, instead of focus leading to success, you might say that the book is that success leads to focus. People try a bunch of things, they're looking to find the best match for them, and once they find that match, then they go all in and focus. So a lot of professionals in sports or otherwise, they sampled a whole bunch of sports, Then Roger Federer discovers that, hey, maybe I'm actually best at this tennis thing, and then he goes all in on tennis rather than the opposite. So if you want to produce a chess prodigy, raise your kid on chess because that is a kind environment, but for many other scenarios, that may not be the best bet. So it's a general treatise, if you will, on being broad versus being specialized. Now, he gives countless examples, it's so well researched, of how hyper-specialized people, even geniuses in biology, chemistry, physics, in huge mathematical fields that are very complex, even geniuses who have hyper-specialized often come up against big problems that they don't know how to solve. And they rack their brains, but they all approach this problem from the same point of view. Whereas sometimes we have other people who maybe work at a Scotch tape company in Minnesota, and that person might bring something to the physicist or to the scientist that scientist never would have discovered. So people with completely different backgrounds, completely different upbringings, often solve these really big challenges with some other totally unknown means simply because they have that breadth of experience. And a lot of the most successful people are able to apply things interdisciplinarily, if you will, and that's how they come up with breakthroughs. Charlie Munger talks about this in his book, Poor Charlie's Almanac, one of my favorites, about how he's able to borrow the big ideas from all of these different schools of thought and synthesize them into something that helps him in a much broader way, which is something that I've always loved as a lover of that book. So, many classic examples. Also, he talks about the need for pushback, changes of communication styles in a lot of organizations, how in NASA they had such a strong hierarchy and protocol system, but that very thing that was their greatest achievement, that structure, quite possibly led to their downfall with things like the Challenger explosion because there wasn't room for dissent or opinions in a purely data-driven work model. So there's so many excellent examples. Obviously, the title says it all. Range, why having more range, more breadth, taking your time, all of these things can help you lead to find greater fulfillment, a greater match for what you're meant to do. So super very much enjoyed this book. I'm gonna give you some takeaways here, some key things. So, key takeaway, narrow focus only works in kind learning environments where the rules are clear and unchanging, environments like chess and golf. And another takeaway, it's not too late for you. Many people, Vincent van Gogh included, they found their life's work, and Charles Darwin, after endless experimentation in seemingly totally unrelated fields. I gave you that quote about psychologists and the many different paths. Also, it suggests that people who are successful don't often have that straight path. In fact, perhaps more often than not, they have a weird and meandering path. They consider themselves to be an anomaly, as they say. Another takeaway, success breeds focus in many cases and not the other way around. Following the next right thing leads to passion and not vice versa. Another takeaway, tough problems are often solved by outsiders from entirely different backgrounds. Only they can bring truly new insights to a problem, especially a very difficult one. Another takeaway, it's not foolish for young people to gravitate towards high-risk jobs when they're young. In fact, it makes more sense for them to start with a high-risk, high-reward job in the beginning because, again, high reward. They can afford to fail. They can afford to lose. So it's a better trade-off for a young person to go for the top, for example, being that DJ or a startup entrepreneur or making those millions, because if they fail, they still have more time to find the other thing, which is, again, contrary to a lot of popular wisdom. So, another takeaway, the people who achieve the biggest hits, whether they're playwrights or songwriters or anybody else, they usually also have the most flops or even publishing academic papers. And sometimes they'll have a hit and major flops in the same year. Last point I'd like to leave you with is that organizations thrive when there's a strong force pushing in the opposite direction of standard practice. If people rely on tools too much, they can end up in a situation where something like the Challenger happens and a lot of people die because nobody was able to question the norms and traditions. So I can't sing the praises of this book enough. Again, everything is marked, everything is highlighted. I'm gonna revisit this a lot. It's an excellent book. Do yourself a favor, buy it. I know it's gonna get you thinking, and it's gonna give you a lot of fuel the next time somebody tries to argue with you about what is the right thing to do in life. So, hope you enjoyed. If you like these kinds of book reviews, if you like this kind of content, be sure to hit that like, subscribe button, comment, share, all of these things. I'm not gonna ask you to smash the subscribe button because that would be cruel, but just tap it gently, hit the bell, turn on notifications, all of that. And you'll see more content, more great books like this, more educational stuff.